Hi everyone, and welcome to In Deep Geek Live. This is the latest in a series of live streams looking at the Targaryen rulers of Westeros. Not just the people who technically sat on the throne, but who were the main Targaryen characters going all the way through history, starting at Aegon I, and we've reached as far as one of the most notable kings there is, Maegor the Cruel. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. But before we get into it, I just wanted to say that today is a charity live stream. I don't know whether you have seen the news coming out from Turkey and Syria, but earlier this week there were a couple of massive earthquakes that did huge amounts of damage. The death toll sadly just keeps on rising. Last time I checked, it was something like 20,000 people died. And on top of that, just utter devastation. Livelihoods, homes have been lost. People have lost their families, their loved ones. And once we get past this initial desperately trying to save as many people as we can, there will be a horrendous period coming up. Water supplies have been cut off, sanitation has gone, people have lost their homes. There is a need for absolute basics. So that's what this live stream is about. Super chats switched off, and all donations go direct to Oxfam, who are working there on the ground right now. That's just a charity that I personally know and respect. There are many other charities who are doing excellent work there. So if you can afford it, then I would love you to donate to that. The little ticker, if you're watching this live, the little ticker at the top that shows the running total of how much has been donated appears not to be working at the moment. I don't know what's some kind of glitch in the system, but we have already had nearly $200 of donations. So thank you so much. I will give you a little update as we're going along. If you have donated already, thank you. I hugely appreciate it. This is genuinely just about helping those people who right now have lost everything in their lives. So if you can afford it, please do. But what we will be talking about today, I will frame this, as I say, about Maegor the First. I will frame this around questions I've got from my patrons. I will try and dip into the chat as much as I possibly can as well. But what I thought I would do was probably start off with give a bit of an overview about Maegor himself, his history, who he was. We've kind of touched on this a little bit last week, because last week we looked at Aenys I, the second Targaryen king and half-brother to Maegor. And George R. R. Martin has set these two up right from the very beginning as opposites. He deliberately set it up to show Aenys as being a nice person, a person who cares about the arts, he cares about music, but quite indecisive, easily swayed one way to another. And that is an opposite to Maegor. Maegor, this big brute of a man, hugely powerful fighter, and hard, cruel. So we're immediately being asked, which of these two would be the better ruler? And George R. R. Martin shows us both of these as rulers. We talked about Aenys last time, and I think basically the feeling was he was probably quite a nice guy, but as a ruler, not very effective. Now we get the chance to look at Maegor, who sometimes gets some apologists saying, well, yeah, he may have been cruel, but he was a strong and decisive ruler. So what I'm wanting is to use this live stream that we can kind of work our way through what he did, and then perhaps come to an understanding. Did he deserve the title Maegor the Cruel? Was he a good ruler, just a hard one, or was he the tyrant that history had painted him as? And Sam Day on Patreon just says, all right, someone has to ask the big question. Was Maegor actually that cruel, or just a bit of necessary tough love to strengthen the realm? So that's the sort of the framing question for what we're looking at today. But to give a bit of the history, the background here to Maegor, he from a very young age did come across as being a brute. Cruel, perhaps. There were rumors when he was very young that he killed a cat. Definitely, he killed a horse. And then when a stable boy came running to see what the mess was about, he basically attacked him as well. This was, he grew up in great privilege, but also people were scared of him from a very young age. His mother, Visenya, gave him the sword Dark Sister, Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister, and he grew up with great renown. He was knighted at a very young age by his father. And all the time, Visenya was trying to kind of push his claim. He would be a better king than Aenys. Everybody knows this. But she and Maegor, who Maegor doesn't seem to have made too many noises about this himself, but Visenya definitely accepted Aegon the Conqueror's decision that Aenys would be his heir. But, of course, Aegon wasn't going to live forever. Aegon died. And from that, Aenys became king. But Maegor then went in. The sword Blackfire was on the funeral pyre. Maegor went in and recovered the sword Blackfire. Aenys granted it to him. And sometime later, he claimed Balerion, the Black Dread, Aegon the Conqueror's dragon. So he has now got both of the Targaryen Valyrian steel swords and the Conqueror's dragon himself. And Aenys made Maegor his hand. And for a while, this kind of worked, because Aenys was facing a lot of small rebellions, and Maegor just went out and crushed them. So far, so good. But then Maegor, he was starting to get a little bit frustrated. The fact that he had been basically forced to marry Cerys Hightower, who he didn't particularly like, but this was a relative of the High Septon. The Faith were very powerful at the time, and he had been forced to marry her, but she had not been producing an heir for him, which he did not like, and eventually he took another wife. Now, the Faith were up in arms about this. Polygamy? No, we can't be having this. And Aenys basically said, okay, so either you set aside your new wife, or you have to go off in exile to Essos, to Pentos, for 5 years. And Maegor just went, okay, sounds like I'm going off on exile. And he headed off. He took the sword Blackfire with him. And while he was gone, the empire just crumbled around Aenys's feet. It was he could not hold this anymore, and eventually he ended up on Dragonstone in the care of Visenya, and he died. Within the hour, Visenya was on her dragon, went over, collected Maegor, brought Maegor back, and Maegor claimed the throne for himself over Aenys's eldest son. Now, everybody knew the lawful line of succession was to go to Aegon, the son of Aenys, but Maegor claimed it. And he had Balerion, he had Blackfire, and he got crowned with Aegon the Conqueror's crown. He had most of the Kingsguard with him on Dragonstone, and then he flew to King's Landing to claim the Iron Throne for himself. And so he went off to King's Landing. He got confronted there by some of the Faith militant, and he fought a battle. It was a 7-on-7 battle, and he won, but he was almost mortally wounded. He was unconscious. He got taken back to the Red Keep, and he was there for nearly a month, completely unconscious. What was going to happen? Aegon, the rightful heir, was stuck the other side of Westeros and couldn't come in and claim the crown for himself. Visenya went off, returned to Pentos, returned with Tiana of the Towers, this mysterious woman who went in, we assume, performed some magic, and then Maegor appeared and almost as good as new. And everyone was like, that's a little bit suspicious. What kind of dark magic has happened here? But he emerged, he came out, got onto Balerion, and just burned all of the opposition that were there, the warriors' sons, the faith militant who were there in King's Landing, and claimed King's Landing for his own. And over the course of the next few years, he then put down a number of these different armies that were coming. The biggest opposition to him were the Faith of the Seven. A number of these different armies. He outlawed the Faith having weapons. He said, if you're a member of the Faith of the Seven, you are no longer, you can't have a warrior class. You can't have any of these kind of paladins going around. And he went to Old Town, where the High Septon was basically denouncing him on a daily basis with Balerion. But before they got there, the High Towers just they smoothed things over. The High Septon tragically died overnight, mysteriously. The gates of Old Town were opened, and in comes Maegor. He gets crowned by the new High Septon, who is very amenable to his needs. He stays there for 6 months, and during that time, he gets reconciled to his first wife, Cerise Hightower, who had been back there. Now, at this point, finally, Aegon, who becomes known as Aegon the Uncrowned, the true heir, decides this is his moment to try and take King's Landing. He has an army. He marches eastwards towards King's Landing. He gets on his own dragon, flies eastwards. Maegor goes, fine. I'll send my army out to take on their army, and I will go and attack on Dragonback. And in the battle beneath the God's Eye, he kills his nephew Aegon and basically gets rid of the last pretender to the throne. Maegor is now very clearly the ruler of Westeros. The only person with a claim against him is gone. But there are still a few other Targaryens hanging around. And what he decides to do is, and he doesn't have an heir himself, so he decides on a few things. First of all, he decides that he will, just in the short term, he will make Aeria Targaryen, who also comes down from that, that's the granddaughter of Aenys. She will be his heir, just for the time being. Yes, this is the same Aeria Targaryen who years later will be flying Balerion. He makes her his heir, and he captures the other Targaryens, and basically some are on Dragonstone, some he keeps in King's Landing, and he then suddenly realizes still getting no more heirs. He marries Tiana of the Towers. 3 wives now. No luck still. 3 more wives he gets. Keeps on adding on these wives. But still no heirs are being produced. People are starting to mutter that perhaps he's cursed. Perhaps he himself was born from black magic. Maybe Visenya only managed to produce. He was very old in terms of childbearing years by the time she had him as a son. So people are then starting to mutter maybe Visenya was involved in some kind of dark magic. And his acts of cruelty started growing during this period. We've already heard about the small things he's done, but then he starts to get paranoid and cruel. He's building the Red Keep. When the Red Keep is finished, all of the builders and architects and masons, he gathers them all together, gives them a feast, and then kills them all, because he doesn't want any of the secrets of the Red Keep out there. When he destroys an army of the Faith Militant, their leader, he hacks off his limbs and then takes his body into King's Landing, making him witness the glory of Maegor's entrance and then his weddings. The 3 new brides, the Black Brides as they're called, that Maegor has, none of them wanted to be his wife, and yet they were all made to marry him because he held their children hostage and made them witness it. He was getting crueler and crueler. Torture became a regular thing. And not just torture of a person, he would make the loved ones of that person watch while torture was happening. He was getting crueler and crueler. But eventually, this was starting to turn the people against him, but he was strong, he was powerful. Who could possibly stand against him? His mother died. Visenya, Queen Visenya died, who had been on Dragonstone. And when she died, what happened was the Targaryens that he effectively kept prisoner there, Elissa Velaryon, who was the widow of Aegon, and her 2 children, Jaehaerys and Alicent, they spotted the opportunity to escape. They grabbed Dark Sister, one of those 2 Valyrian steel swords, and they disappeared. Where they went was actually Storm's End, we found out a little bit later. Because then we start getting more and more opposition to him. He gets very angry. He decides that he wishes to disinherit Jaehaerys, and he's got Arya there as his heir, but Arya's sister is down in Old Town. He gets angry. He orders her, Raella, to be killed, but the Hightowers say no. He's now got enemies there. Jaehaerys declares himself down in Storm's End. He's got enemies there. Maegor calls the banners. People left, right, and centre start just slinking away into the shadows. They are not going to be standing there by Maegor's side. He calls this war council. Only a few people turn up. And eventually, at the end of this war council, he paces around and he goes into his throne room and he sits down on the Iron Throne. And it's the end of the night and they close the doors. And the next morning, he's discovered dead, impaled on the Iron Throne. How was he killed? We'll cover that a bit later in this live stream. But his reputation was as Maegor the Cruel, and that nickname came to him during his reign, it's probably worth saying. So that's the high-level overview of who Maegor the Cruel was and what he did. It was a 6-year reign. He had it technically 6 years and 66 days, 666. Yes, George R. R. Martin is playing with this. So that is long enough to do huge amounts of damage, but not so long as to destroy the entire 7 kingdoms. To return to the original question from Sam Day, was he just cruel? Was it a bit of necessary tough love to strengthen the realm? Yes, he was cruel. I think there's no way that we can get around that idea. He was definitely a cruel king, and it's easier to think of ways that he was cruel. In fact, if you twist it around the other way, it's very hard to think of any times when he was not cruel. So, was it just tough love in order to strengthen the realm? I think that, for me, that argument kind of falls down with the fact that at the end of it, at the end of his realm, he had lost the confidence of everyone. Everybody had turned against him. He may have seen this as tough love, necessary things to do in order to strengthen the realm, but actually he lost the realm. The realm, the entire realm, turned against him. So that is, I think, the biggest argument against this tough love idea, is that did he defeat the Faith militant? Well, actually, he killed a lot of them, but they were still there. Jaehaerys had to finally end that. So he didn't do that. Did he end the line of people who were claiming that they were from Aegon's line down through Aenys? No, Charis inherited. So he actually did not succeed on any level, would be my personal argument. So we have a character who, and I hope we can unpick some of the moral complexity here, but I think we do need to say very clearly up front, he was cruel, and it's not just a nickname which was thrown around to discredit him. In my view, he did a lot of horrific things in his time. Okay, so that's the overview. I'll try and dig into a few questions in the chat. Reflective Rambling saying the charity counter is not working. Can you check to make sure things are legit going through? Yes, they are. If you're worried about this, they are. I've got another way of looking at the counter, which isn't on there, which tells me we're now up to $672.45. So first of all, thank you. If you've been donating, thank you. This is to people who need this money so desperately, or need the help so desperate. This will go to pay for people getting access to water, sanitation, a roof over their heads, the absolute basic needs. So thank you very much. Yes, the donations are going through. I'm afraid I can't. There are too many donations for me to shout at everybody, but I hugely appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I should just clarify for anybody who's wondering, 100%, and this goes for not just for this charity live stream, all the ones I do and everywhere on YouTube, as far as I'm aware, charity live streams, 100% of what you donate goes straight to that charity. YouTube don't take a cut. I don't take a cut. It just goes straight to them. So little round of applause to YouTube for that. That's excellent. So yeah, don't worry about any of that. That's where that money goes. So let's just flick through, and the chat. Amy Smith saying can't donate through YouTube in Australia. Does anyone know the donating link? Oxfam, yeah, perhaps one of the moderators could put a link up there. There are lots of places you can donate. If you're in the UK, you don't wish to donate through here, then the Disasters Emergency Committee is the DEC is a good place to go. I'm sure there will be plenty of other places you can give. Charis Ballerina saying, why was Maegor so desperate for an heir when a niece had children and grandchildren? Why kidnap and kill for children? Well, so I think this is just the very basic desire to have your own children inherit after you. Added to which, he probably coming from Visenya, there was this a strong feel that a niece was not a worthy king. He wasn't good enough. He wasn't strong enough. And frankly, that may well have been passed down to his heirs. I think that's there. If you go even further back, there were mutterings that maybe a niece wasn't Aegon's trueborn son. There were mutterings about that at the time. Maybe that played into it. We do not know. Whatever the truth of it, I think it's simply that Maegor wanted to have children of his own who could inherit after him. And he just picked a person to inherit or to be next in line in the short term. Just as a throwaway thing here, we often hold up Jaehaerys I as being this great, wise, wonderful king, the best of the Targaryen kings. Just to be clear, he took the throne by force, and not just because Maegor had gone. Maegor had named an heir, and he took it regardless. So he was basically coming in and taking it away from the person whom the previous king had named heir. You can argue your way around it, saying, well, she shouldn't have been heir, but that's what happened. Yeah, murdering people Callie Summers saying that murdering everyone in Harrenhal at the very least. That's exactly the same. Maegor echoed that himself. He murdered everybody in Harrenhal too, having the Aegon gave the Harrenhal obviously to a loyal family, but then Maegor just killed them all. Right, let's go to a question from Shasha. This is related to that question about whether Maegor was actually that cruel. And Shasha says, House of the Dragon seems to like to try to rehabilitate unanimously reviled characters, as they did with some of the Greens. What could they plan to do for Maegor if they someday choose to make a season covering his life? Which is a really interesting question, because they might. Now, I've said this before, but with Fire and Blood, with House of the Dragon, the clear decision is that they are, at least in the short term, only wanting to be covering things that George R. R. Martin has already written. So, assuming we don't have Fire and Blood Part 2 anytime in the near future, what that means is when we finish with the Dance of the Dragons, where are they going to go? Well, probably to Aegon's conquest, but then Maegor, they could definitely have a season on Maegor and Maegor's rule, perhaps. So that would be quite a dark and bloody season, but they could definitely do that. Is there any way, would they want to rehabilitate him? And is there any way that they could do that? Well, my take is, first of all, I think that they may not. I think that having Maegor the Cruel as somebody that cruel and bad, actually, they might be okay with that. Depends who's the showrunner, depends which way they want to go with this. But because you can't really get away from his actions. As much as you might dig into the motivations, you can't really get away from his actions, and his actions were cruel. Now, what House of the Dragon, in my view, has been doing is not so much rehabilitating characters as trying to show things, round out the characters and try to show things a little more from their perspective. So let's take Alicent for an example. With Alicent, we became a little bit more sympathetic to her when we started to see that she was being manipulated by her father, that she'd been put into a marriage with somebody that probably she wouldn't choose normally, and it wasn't all that nice for her. And we therefore give her some sympathies for that. And then the genuine, on the show, this isn't in the book, but on the show, the genuine mix-up about her believing that Viserys had on his deathbed basically said that he wanted her son to be king. And that, followed by her trying to make avoid a war if at all possible, gives us a slightly more rounded version of Alicent. What might they do for Maegor? I think not to change his actions, but they might try to show us a little bit more about who he was, why he was like the way that he was. If he was brought up, and I think that the link to his mother is a really important one. His mother clearly was an incredibly strong character and will have had a huge impact on his development as a person. So it would not surprise me if they make him be there, always trying to live up to the ideals that his mother has got, show strength, because he feels he has to, something along those lines. That would, I think, work really well as a character. It wouldn't make us think that he's great. It wouldn't make us think that he's a good person. He wouldn't rehabilitate him in everyone's eyes, but it would make us understand him more, because at the moment he's not two-dimensional, but he is very, very clearly somebody who does these things because he's a bad person. And that's the way that George R. R. Martin has put him across in Fire and Blood. George R. R. Martin famously loves having morally grey characters, and so I think he would actually embrace the idea of having a few extra layers of nuance into the character. Oh, Nemo Nova, thank you. That's a very generous donation. Thank you very much for that. Okami Memo S saying, do you think after House of the Dragon ends, we'll get another season that takes place after the events of the dance or before, straight to the Blackfire Rebellion or revisiting Aegon's conquest? Yeah, so what I said was, my take is, assuming we haven't got Fire and Blood Part 2, I don't think we're going to do Blackfire Rebellions or anything like that just yet. If I had to guess, and this is not based on any inside information at all, but if I had to guess, we're going to have 4 seasons of The Dance of the Dragons. After that, they will pause for a second and then go and do Aegon's invasion. Then they will see where they're at. I think that because those are the 2 obvious points, stories in Fire and Blood Part 1. If by then they've got Fire and Blood Part 2, then perhaps they might venture up to the Blackfire Rebellions or something like that. When we get Fire and Blood Part 2, though, I mean, who knows? George R. R. Martin did originally have this very clear order in which he was writing things. He said he was doing The Winds of Winter first, then maybe he was going to do a Duncan Egg or 2, then he was going to do A Dream of Spring, and then he was going to do Fire and Blood Part 2 and the rest of the Duncan Egg. That was what he said he was going to do. Now he's kind of backtracked a bit on that and basically said everything is his priority, and he's got lots of different things he's working on. But in terms of written output, the next thing will be The Winds of Winter. And obviously your guess is as good as mine when we're going to get that, but it's not going to happen this year, let's put it that way. And that means that even if he then starts writing Fire and Blood after that, that'll be at least another couple of years doing that Fire and Blood Part 2. So who knows? I don't expect by the time we finish the Dance of the Dragons bit of House of the Dragon, we are going to have more material in Fire and Blood. So let's have a quick flick through, see any more. Astronaut E saying, I think they could make Maegor much more sympathetic, quite possibly. Mark Sheeser saying, the adventures of a young Howland Reed, anyone? That would be, I mean, I would be torn on that, actually. Having said that would be amazing. That's because I just love the character of Howland Reed. Personally, I think that Howland Reed should stay in the neck until we're getting away from Maegor. We'll come back to Maegor in just 1 second, but this idea is caught in brain. I think he should stay in the neck until that moment when he paddles down and gets called to the Isle of Faces. What would be amazing, they wouldn't do it, but what would be amazing is to do Robert's Rebellion not through the eyes of the powers that be, Rhaegar and Eris and Robert Baratheon and people like that, but through the eyes of Howland Reed. That would be astonishing. As I say, they won't do it, but that would be a really good idea. Let's go to a question from George R.R. Tolkien, saying, salutations, Robert. Salutations to you too, sir. I wanted to ask you about Maegor's heir and why he chose her, besides not being able to make another heir himself. What was she to him? And I wanted to ask you, do you think a lot of conflict could have been avoided if kings like Viserys and Aenys would have let their twisted little brothers marry who they wanted? Just let them love, I say. Well, I'll answer that one in just a moment. But in terms of why Maegor chose Arya Targaryen as his heir, I think it was largely a matter of elimination. Who could he possibly choose? Because he had to have an heir, but he didn't. He wasn't going to be Alyssa Velaryon because that was the wife of the man he just killed. He didn't want it to be Jaehaerys or Viserys. who were the other two sons of Aegon the Uncrowned, because they were realistic threats to him. They were real. People could rally around either of them and call them the true king. So he wasn't going to make either of them his heir. Could have done Alison, but then why on earth would you pick Alison if you haven't picked those two? It just seems like a slightly left field choice. So the options there are the twins, Ariel and Raella, and Raella went down to Oldtown, and Ariel he chose to be his heir. So it was just a matter of elimination. All of the other Targaryens were not realistic. That's not going to happen. So if he was going to have a Targaryen heir, it would be Ariel. So I don't think he had any particular care or love for her. It was just couldn't be anyone else. In terms of the second part there, do you think a lot of conflict could have been avoided if kings like Viserys and Aenys would have let their brothers marry who they wanted? I think this wasn't the issue with Maegor marrying who he wanted while Aenys was king. It wasn't actually Aenys who was the issue. It was the faith. I think Aenys probably didn't care that much if his half brother had two wives. I don't think that would have bothered him huge amounts, other than the fact that the faith suddenly said, no, you cannot do that. That's just wrong. So, and he was easily swayed. So I think that he would probably have let Maegor get away with it, but for the pressure placed on him by the faith of the Seven, by the High Septon. Would it have, if he just said, okay, Maegor, you do what you want, would it have made a difference? Well, it would have made history go in a slightly different way, because Maegor would then have stayed in Westeros, and perhaps he would have managed to put down the Faith Uprising, nip it in the bud, in a way that he clearly didn't, by him going away to Pentos for a little while and then coming back. The Faith Uprising had a chance to spread across the Seven Kingdoms, and so he could destroy the people in King's Landing. He could destroy a couple of different armies and still have the High Septon there shouting at him and still not beat them. The time difference was probably the crucial matter there. So would it have made a difference? It may well have done, but I suspect that Aenys probably would have died relatively young anyway, and that would have led to Maegor being on the throne, and his cruelty would have been there for everyone to see in any event. And I don't think in the long run it would have made all that much difference. Just a quick check on the because the ticker isn't working for the donations. So far we have raised, he says, hoping this refreshes, $873. So thank you so much again if you've been donating. Let's see whether we can get that one up to 1,000. That would be absolutely fantastic if we could. Seek and Destroy 99 saying, I wish they would do Robert's Rebellion. Yes, absolutely. I would love that too. That, though, it's not looking likely. For those who missed the update from George R.R. Martin, we have 9 spin-offs from Game of Thrones, one of which obviously we know about, which is House of the Dragon. That left 8. They're pre-production. They've not been greenlit. They're all progressing quite slowly, it has to be said, caught up in this problem that it's not just HBO. All of the streaming companies have been having huge amounts of problems overcommitting, having to cut shows that they might otherwise not want to do. So they haven't yet committed to any more spin-offs from Game of Thrones. George R. R. Martin has said now that a couple of those 8 have been shelved, so they're not all being pushed forward. If I had to guess, probably in the current climate, you would guess the bigger budget ones that are slightly riskier. So I think something actually, ironically, like the Jon Snow show is still possible. The bigger budget kind of things would be stuff like the Corlys Velaryon 9 Voyages thing, the 10,000 ships, the Nymeria story. Those ones could potentially be big budget. So it would not surprise me if one or both of those have been shelved. But yeah, that's where we're at. Robert's Rebellion is not one of those. As far as we're aware, there are a couple of animated series which we haven't been told the details of. Reza F saying, I think Fire and Blood 2 would be written only if there's a plan to make the Blackfire Rebellion into a TV show, the way he wrote Fire and Blood 1 in order to make a dance series. I don't think it's quite that direct myself, but I think that his intention is to do Fire and Blood Part 2. He wants to do it all. He in his mind, the finishing off the job is finishing off A Song of Ice and Fire, finishing off Dunk and Egg, and finishing off Fire and Blood Part 2. That I think he thinks then is his with the World of Ice and Fire. I think he then thinks that is his canon done, his book canon, but he has still got a role there with the TV show. So that's where I think he is. That doesn't mean he's not going to suddenly randomly do some other thing. He does seem to be the kind of person who gets excited about a project and then charges forward and does that. Shelley J, thank you very much. Incredibly generous donation there. Jordan Neeland saying, do you think Aenys wanted to pass the crown to Maegor and Aenys was just gradually giving Maegor more power to overtake him? No, I don't. I think Aenys was wanting his son Aegon, who he named as heir, to be taking over from him. Aenys gave the sword Blackfire to Maegor and he made him Hand of the King. But when he banished Maegor, he asked for Blackfire back. Maegor ignored him, but that I think shows that Aenys didn't think, okay, you're the rightful best next king. All of what Aenys was doing was trying to make the people love his son. This was something, and it was, of all the things that he seemed to have done, one of the better ones, as in concept, if not perhaps in execution. He picked up on something that his father, Aegon the Conqueror, did very well, which was this idea of progresses, that the realm did not know who their king was. The lords and ladies of the realm had never met their king. All they knew was a conqueror. So he went on these progresses. Aegon went around stopping off at various halls and manors and castles, spending time with people, learning about local areas and dispensing justice and letting them see him. And that was something that Aenys himself took up and thought, this is a good idea. I will do this too. And my son should do this. And so he sends his son off to do this because he thinks that is what a good king should do. Which clearly implies he thinks that he should be passing this on. Nolins Saint saying, did Visenya commit regicide? This is we did cover this question last week actually with Aenys. It's slightly up in the air. You could argue it either way. Where we have with Aenys is that he went to Dragonstone, he fell ill. Visenya said, I'll look after him, don't worry. And he started getting better, but then he got a lot worse and died. That's the information we have. There were rumors later that perhaps she'd done it, not at the time, we're told, but there were rumors later that maybe she had hurried along his death. The only really suspicious thing about it, because he was quite a sickly person, but he was very young. He was in his 30s when he died. And it's like Targaryens tend not to get diseases So what was it? Was it just like a bad heart or something? We don't know. So there's no real explanation there. Is there any evidence that she did? No. There's no evidence that she did. But it's just a little suspicious. So maybe. Andrew K saying Aenys did make progresses, but they did not go well for him or his son Aegon. If anything, gave him first-hand view of Aenys. They gave them the first-hand view of Aenys's weaknesses. Yeah, as I say, so one of the good ideas in theory, if not in practice and delivery. So it was not a the big problem when Aegon the Uncrowned could not claim the crown for himself, could not claim the Iron Throne, allowing Maegor to claim it, was because he was on one of these progresses. He reached Crakehall off in the west. But the Faith Militant had just like blocked him in. There was an army of them who just blocked him in, and he was stuck there for months, years, actually. Sam Day saying, got to go to uni now. Enjoy it. So let's go to Richard Smith saying, in Deep Geek, is Maegor's coma analogous to Henry VIII's potential brain injury, do you think? Was he crueler afterwards? See also wives. Yeah, I'll talk about the wives Henry VIII thing in a little bit. Was he crueler after that? Not noticeably would be what I would say. The difference was that he had more power and more ability to be cruel. So it's like he started out being cruel. He would kill people and hurt people just randomly because he could. When he was in a battle with someone, he would just inflict as much pain as possible. When he was king, the potential he had to do that was so much greater, but his character seems not to have been changed by it. Alhad saying, greetings, Robert. Greetings to you. I have two questions. How will you... Oh, and actually, this is coming in for this. How do you compare Maegor's decision-making before and after Visenya's death? So that is the other key turning point. The first turning point we have for him potentially is him going into this coma for basically a month before miraculously coming out of it. Did that change anything? Yes, he did more big, cruel things afterwards, but it doesn't seem to have changed his character. The second thing is when Visenya, his mother, died while he was king. Did that change anything? No. It would be in terms of his decision making. What it changed, I think, was the fact that she had always been there as being the person by his side, and without her, it was just him. He and people felt that they could stand up to just him. By which I mean, when I said that Maegor went down to Old Town and basically the High Towers saw sense and killed the old High Septon and put a new one in place and welcomed him, it wasn't just him. This was after Visenya had gone out and burned a few towns and castles of rebellious lords, and then she headed down with Maegor there. So it was almost her leading him to it. And the two of them, this was echoing what happened during Aegon's invasion. Balerion and Vhagar, the two biggest, oldest, most ferocious dragons there are. Once you get rid of Visenya, suddenly it's just one man. Yes, one incredibly powerful man on an incredibly powerful dragon, but it's still just one man. And that is something people seem to have felt that they could oppose. So was he any different? It doesn't seem like he was. But people seemed to react slightly differently or gain a greater strength of purpose. When Visenya died, that's when Jaehaerys, Alicent, Alyssa escaped. that's when they went and people started gaining more courage to be opposing him. The second question from Alhad was Maegor's treatment or resurrection after the trial of the seven akin to the resurrection of the mountain? Yes. So this is, and I kind of skated over it in my overview at the beginning, but when he came in to claim the Iron Throne, he flew into King's Landing after Aeneas's death, and he claimed the Iron Throne, and then the warrior sons, the faith, opposed him, and they had a trial of the seven. And this is important because the fact that he won then meant, by the faith's own beliefs, he had been proven by the seven to be in the right. So that's why that was particularly significant. But he got people to stand by him, and there were seven opposed, and they had a fight. It was a quick fight, we're told, and he survived but was in a coma, and Visenya was the one who stood up and said, he's still living, everybody else is dead. Yes, I know he's in a coma, but him living means that he won and he is the king. So it was actually, for that time, Visenya who made the big decision. It was Visenya who basically crowned him. Was this akin to the resurrection of the mountain? Which is interesting because George R. R. Martin does provide an echo of the mountain, Gregor Clegane, with Maegor. In the story we have of his youth, when we get the killing a horse. That's what we saw at the beginning of Game of Thrones. Book 1, the mountain gets thrown from his horse and just decapitates his own horse. And that's basically what Maegor does. And the mountain, we're told, gets angry with people who make too much noise. And that's what happened with this stable boy who was rushed in to see what all the commotion was about. He got angry and Maegor attacked him. So we're being invited to see an echo there. And also the physicality is clearly very strong as a sort of a comparison between the two. Is this him coming back from this coma like what happened with the mountain? Well, it's a trial. It's a trial of champions as opposed to a trial of the seven, which he is assumed killed. He survives, but he's assumed basically dead. So it's the same kind of idea. When he comes, the difference comes in the fact that Maegor comes back and says, I survived. I'm here. It's me. And he just carries on doing things pretty much as he did before. The mountain is proclaimed dead. He dies afterwards of his wounds. And then we get this Robert Strong character appearing. Nobody ever claims this is the mountain. So this is a clear contrast to what's happening with Maegor. Nobody says that this is actually the mountain. It looks like him. It appears to be him, but he has this helmet. When you actually read the description of helmet welded onto his armor, and you can't see his eyes through it. And the clear implication from the way George R. R. Martin writes it is that his head is not there. The skull, the mountain skull, is sent to Dawn. So it seems as if what happens is he's reanimated as a different person, can't talk, doesn't eat, and probably doesn't even have a head, which is different to Maegor. Is there an echo of the two stories? Yes, there is an echo, but it isn't. It's not analogous. It's not the same. Rosa F, whose head was sent to Doran, I see absolutely no reason to doubt why that was the Mountain's Head. Jordan Leland saying, how smart was Maegor? Sir Gregor was fairly dumb, although with great warrior instincts. Well, we're not told that he was book smart. That is pretty clear. So he doesn't seem to have been sort of reading lots. In terms of how smart he was, I mean, we're not told one way or the other, but we just have to look at his actions. And he comes across, and this might seem a little bit of a weird comparison. He comes across a bit like Cersei. And what I mean by that is that Cersei as a character is all about short-term wins, and she thinks she's good at strategy, but actually she's not. She does things which will come back to bite her later on. And this seems to happen again and again in the story. It seems to be set up for this to be happening again and again in the story. Maegor's the same. He does this. Everything he does has an implication later on. When he kills all of those people who've been building the Red Keep, the problem then is that when he says, and now I'm going to be building the Dragon Pit, everybody in King's Landing who was a builder, bricklayer, architect, they all went, right, well, I'm not hanging around because I know what happened to the people who built this last one, and they all just left. So that was counterproductive. He, when he was attacking the Faith of the Seven, it wasn't actually destroying the Faith of the Seven. It was not achieving what he wanted it to achieve. Now, this is the reason why I was picking Cersei as well, is that there is a sort of a bizarre echo between those two as well, because Maegor was the person who formally disarmed the Faith of the Seven. It didn't work during his time, but he legally said, he changed the law and says the Faith of the Seven cannot have armed units wandering around the land. They're not allowed to do that. They ignored him and carried on. It was Charis who managed to actually get that to stick, but it was Maegor's law. The person who changes that law hundreds of years later is Cersei, and she will reap all of the fire and the fury that comes from that. Now, what we have again sort of echoes, you could say, is you have the great sept of remembrance, which was there. Maegor burned down. What's Cersei going to do with the great sept? Certainly on the show, she burnt it. She blew it up. Is that going to happen in the books? Something like that's going to happen. There are echoes. If you had to pick a character where there are echoes, it's probably more Cersei, it has to be said. It feels counterintuitive to start with, but the more you dig into it, the more you see her as being this counterpoint to him. Let's do a quick update actually on the giving. Thank you so much, everybody, for donating. It's incredibly generous. As I say, this, if you're watching this later, I should probably say you can still donate. I'm just going to leave this open. So just because you're not watching this live doesn't mean you can't. There is a donate button somewhere. So do not worry. But as of this moment, we're on $910. Thank you so much, everyone. The money, all the money you give is going straight to the front line in Turkey and Syria for people who desperately need it. So if you've not had a chance to donate to this yet, then I encourage you to do so. Be as generous as you are able. Thank you very much. Just as a sort of a brief pause halfway through this, and other thank yous that I always do. Patrons, thank you. I cannot do what I do without your support, so thank you hugely. That's why I frame these live streams around your questions. If you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There's a link somewhere down there. Moderators, thank you as well. You do an amazing job, particularly today. I see you've been putting up a lot of links to other places people can donate. If you cannot donate here, then and I know that YouTube giving isn't enabled in every country of the world. So if you cannot donate here, if you're watching live, there are some links appearing in the live chat. If you are watching live, please just show a little bit of love to the moderators. They do a fantastic job. Thank you. And the other thing I just wanted to say for this channel, just to sort of flag up a couple of things going, I've kind of teased over the last 2 or 3 weeks that I've got things that I'm planning on. I will do a proper announcement next week, but I've got a couple of things that I would just draw your attention to. The first is short form content. I'm going to be doing a bit more short form content. So if you would like to see some of that, I've got Instagram. I will be doing some stuff on Reels. So please do, if you're on Instagram, do check me out there on Deep Geek Official on Instagram. Also, I'm on TikTok. I've not done anything on TikTok, but I will be putting things up there. So go and find me in Deep Geek over on TikTok if you are interested in that. The other thing is I would just show you that. Which is something I will be announcing very soon. I'll be telling my patrons about it over the course of the next couple of days, but this is an exciting next, another channel for a different type of content from me, still focusing on the same things, still with the same hopefully the same kind of analysis and insight, but just presented in slightly different ways. So that's a few things to be looking forward to. Let's go back to I'll have a quick flick through the chat. Thank you again, some people donating. Hugely appreciate that. And let's go to some questions from my patrons. Catherine Furseth saying, could you say a little bit about the role or position the Faith of the Seven had during Maegor's life and reign? On the one hand, Targaryens seem to care what the Faith thinks. For example, Aenys's banning of Maegor for taking a second wife, and then seemingly deciding that incestuous marriages were worth alienating the Faith over. How powerful was the Faith in real terms? Well, this is there's a few layers to this. In terms of that second bit, why did Aenys allow his children to marry but not want Maegor to take a second wife? I think this is because for the Targaryens, there's a sort of a hierarchy of weirdy marital relations. That's the wrong way of saying it, but you know what I mean. Incest was vitally important to them. It had been practiced all the way through, as far as we can tell, with the Targaryens for generations, and in all the way back through to the Valyrians, in order to keep the Dragon Lord, the Valyrian ancestry, as pure and strong as possible. So this was a matter of keeping their cultural identity. Polygamy seems not to have been normal for the Targaryens. Some did it. Aegon and his sister wives obviously did, but that was an anomaly. So that you could back down to the Faith over, but perhaps you wouldn't want to over incest. So that, I think, was what was going, if you were Aenys. So that was what was going on there. In terms of the power and position of the Faith of the Seven were the preeminent faith in the south of Westeros. So we're not talking the north, obviously. We're not talking over in the Iron Islands also, and we're not talking in Dawn. Different things are happening over there. And also there were a few First Men families just dotted around the Riverlands and elsewhere. But generally speaking, across the central to southern bit of the Westeros, the Faith of the Seven was the preeminent faith. What that meant was that in every town and village there was either a sept or there was a wandering septon or scepter who would pass by every now and then. They were the people who were doing the weddings and the official stuff. That was what they were. It wasn't an official state religion, because before Aegon the Conqueror arrived, because there wasn't universal rulership over all the seven kingdoms. When Aegon came, he recognized the importance of this, and he made sure that he got himself crowned by the High Septon in Old Town, because he saw this as being, this is the symbol of authority. This is the way that everybody will recognize. It's not just me putting a crown on my own head. There is some authority going on here, making me the king. So that kind of stayed all the way through Aegon's reign. He was powerful enough as a ruler that nobody dared oppose him, but his position was basically, the Targaryens are different and separate. We do our own thing, but we recognize that the faith of the Seven are the most important faith and have implicitly got a state role there in crowning the rightful king. By the time we get into Aenys and then Maegor, the faith was in exactly the same position, but the ruler was not Aegon. So with Aenys, they felt as if they could push back. They felt as if they could threaten. And Aenys did give way to them on quite a few different issues. And when we got to Maegor, they could actually put armies out into the field, we read. So this, are they powerful? Yes, they're very powerful. They can, this wasn't just, there was a rabble who just suddenly turned up and thought, you know what, we'll go there. This was literally, there were 3-4 different armies we read about who are there, the faith militant. They are as strong and powerful as any of the big noble lords, but at a different level, because they cut across the entire Seven Kingdoms, and it was mostly the small folk. There were some pious members of the nobility, but their power base was among the small folk, and they could whip them up. And you can see this when you get to the incident in the Dance of the Dragons with the shepherd who could whip up the small folk against the Targaryens. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. Richard Smith saying TikTok dance for us. No, that's not that's not my plan. A couple of people saying they've found my next project. Yeah, it is out there. It is no content yet. But yeah, some people have found it from the sort of the teasers and hints that I've been raising. Kalnitsky saying I watch mostly streams. Yeah, so live stuff. New project will be doing a lot more that kind of idea. Let's have quickly flicking at Matthew saying I'm very proud of myself for having found it already. Well, yes, you should be. I've not given many clues. Andrew K talking about YouTube Shorts. Yes, look out for YouTube Shorts. The short form content for those. Basically, it's the same. It's videos, but shorter ones. So things that could go on TikTok, I'll probably be uploading onto Instagram and YouTube Shorts as well. And Rich, long-time fan, first time catching a live stream. Welcome. Great to see you. James Hatfield's saying, how do we get a question answered by Robert from the chat? Do we need to donate? It's just a matter of if I spot it, James, in all honesty. I try and flick. The chat goes through very quickly, and I'm talking all the way through this, so I don't get a chance to read all of them. So if I see it, then I will try and answer. Right. Let's go to question from Fred Versteeg saying, oh, actually, no question, saying, just want to say I enjoy the series about the Kings of Westeros. I'm enjoying it too. I studied history in the 80s, and this feels like I've had a grant to study in Old Town for a year. Well, thank you. I definitely appreciate that. Callie Summers saying, I think a lot of us are playing a bit of devil's advocate for Maegor, but could you make a comparison between him and the Mountain? I've sort of done this already, but let's pick this up. So apologies, I didn't order them in the right way. It seems like they're supposed to be echoes in some way, but Gregor was cruel without ever needing a reason. Maegor was definitely violent at a young age, but perhaps it's just not a good idea to give a child deadly weapons. Maegor usually had a reason for his actions. I mean, the only thing I would sort of add to what I've already said is that Maegor did often have a reason for his actions. So, for example, the killing the builders of the Red Keep, there was a reason. We may not agree that that was an appropriate and a reasonable response, but there was a reason for it. But it's not always like that. He was unnecessarily cruel, would be my general take. When he decided that one member of a family was had betrayed him, he killed the entire family, and including children. Now that is, you could argue, well, that makes sense because otherwise the rest of them might turn it. But that is quite a slippery slope of logic to go down. I would argue that is unnecessary. And in the same way that the Mountain, you could argue that a lot of what he did was there in order to help the plan when he's going around in the Riverlands. Yes, he's being brutal, but this is what he was told that he had to do. He was deliberately commissioned by Tywin to go through the Riverlands and cause chaos and havoc and fear. And that was what he was doing. The second part of this, Callie's saying, I wonder how much of Maegor's cruelty depicted in the histories has to do with Jaehaerys and Alicent's reign and influence. They recognize the importance of legitimacy from the small folk, and casting the king they unseated as even worse than he really was would fit. They had several generations of influence, so they could make sure that they were seen as heroic. Yeah, this is an interesting one. So I think this is one of those ones where it's not just like a hard and fast answer. I think that we can say yes, but to this. Yes, definitely. It was necessary or useful, I should say, for Jaehaerys to paint Maegor as being even more brutal and cruel than he was, because then Jaehaerys could appear to be this great and noble and wise leader, not like that other guy. It probably would have been counterproductive to imply that there was something wrong with the Targaryen family. By the time we get all the way down to A Song of Ice and Fire, Tyrion's there sort of glibly talking about, when a Targaryen is born, the gods toss a coin, are they going to be great or are they going to be terrible? That is not a good narrative for a Targaryen king to have. And if Jaehaerys and co had started a lot down that line, then that was probably not wise in the long term. But as I say, yes, they probably would have very happily allowed the stories of Maegor's cruelty to carry on, to show a difference between him and Jaehaerys. Now, could everything have been exaggerated? Could Maegor actually have been an okay king? I don't think that's possible, because the things he did were so far-reaching that when the histories were written, that you couldn't just completely make up new stuff. And the entire kingdom turned against Maegor. The stories of what happened to the builders of the Red Keep went as far as Essos. This was not just something which could be controlled by the PR department of the Red Keep. This is something that they could build on. Maegor was bad. He was cruel. He was nasty. They could build on it, but they couldn't create a new persona that was not there. Callie Summers saying getting a yes but is almost a badge of honor. I've not got onto your customary tinfoil yet. I'll answer that one next. Let's have a quick flick through the chat. James Hatfield saying, was there anything like the divine right of kings in Westeros at any point? Were rulers seen as divinely appointed by the faith? Not in the same way that, say, you would have in medieval England or France, I think is the answer. Because the Targaryens kept themselves different, particularly when you get as far as Charis, who made it a decree of exceptionalism. He made it law, effectively saying Targaryens are different and Targaryens are not subject to the faith of the Seven, because we're better. Now, once you go down that route, you say actually the faith of the Seven is not the preeminent faith over us, and that means that the Seven, the authority of the Seven, is not what gives the Targaryens their right to rule. The Targaryens almost sort of like they use the faith for some people to add some legitimacy. Basically, they get crowned by the faith of the Seven, which adds a bit of legitimacy. If they weren't crowned by the faith of the Seven, does that mean that they weren't actually king? No, I think they would still say they were king, but they just happen not to have been crowned by the faith of the Seven. I think a good example of this is in House of the Dragon, when you get that moment with the crowning of Aegon II in the Dragon Pit. The idea here was that they were trying to generate legitimacy. Alicent wanted her son to be crowned in a way that everybody would recognize that he was the king. What did they do? Well, they did it in front of lots of people. They had the faith of the Seven doing the crowning. They gave him the sword Blackfire, and then he would sit on the Iron Throne. That is the whole series of these bits of legitimacy, things that you could say that's what makes somebody the rightful king. The faith of the Seven is a part of that, but it is not the only thing. In the same way that owning the sword Blackfire was a part of it, but it was not the only thing. Chaos Ballerina picking up a question for Amy Smith, saying, if not for the Faith Rebellion, do you think Maegor would have usurped? Yes. Yeah. So he would have, the moment, the thing was Aenys's death. Now, you could question whether Aenys would have died that early, but for a Faith Rebellion, perhaps not. But the moment he did die, then Maegor was taking over regardless. I think that's the key point. If there hadn't been a Faith Rebellion going on, that would have meant that we get Aegon the Uncrowned would have been able to go and try and claim King's Landing for himself. I think all that would realistically have happened is that battle between the two of them would have happened earlier. Maegor would still have won, though. So I don't think it made all that much difference. I'm all fuzzy now, apparently. I do apologize for that, as that my streaming is perhaps not going perfectly. Let's do a quick update on donations. And thank you very much, everyone who has been doing it. We are so close now to 1,000. We're on $983. If we can just push that one over 1,000, that would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's go to question from, actually, this is the Callie Summers with a customary tinfoil. Charis killed Maegor. The Iron Throne is full of sharp swords, but a blade sticking out that far at neck level? ? How could Maegor accidentally impale himself completely? It makes a lot more sense that young Charis was hiding behind the throne and waited until Maegor was positioned so that he could stab him through a gap in the throne. We all think of the great art of Maegor still impaled on the throne, but I don't know how it would make sense for it to actually happen. Even in the legends, the throne doesn't move. It just gives bad luck to unworthy people. Well, I'm afraid I don't think I'm going to give a yes but or no but on this one. The George R. R. Martin, you picture what George R. R. Martin's idea of the Iron Throne is like, and you'll have seen it. It's a Mark Simonetti picture. If I planned ahead, I would have got it and put it up here, but it's many steps up to the top to where the throne is, and it's thousands of jagged blades. Now, what that means is that it's not like the Iron Throne in Game of Thrones. It's not even like the Iron Throne on House of the Dragon, although that's closer to it. This is much higher than that. You're craning your neck, you crane your neck upwards just to see the top of the Iron Throne. And that's the kind of feel we've got here. So Charis just hiding behind it, no, he would have to scale all the way up to the top of it and then stab him. So I think that's not right. Added to which he wasn't there. He was down in Storm's End at the time. So I like the thinking, but it does make me it does lead on to how did he die? I think Maura Lee, you had a question on this one as well. What did you say? Maegor's reign came to a rather gruesome ending. Some say he's murdered. Some believe he committed suicide. Some think the Iron Throne did him in. What do you think? Well, I think that he was murdered. I don't believe that this was suicide. There's no hint that this was suicide. He didn't appear suicidal from what we're told. Before he seemed quite defiant. There was no note or anything like that. So suicide doesn't appear likely. Did the Iron Throne itself kill him? That's the kind of story that people like, because it tells a good story about the Iron Throne. But realistically, it doesn't. It cuts people, but it doesn't kill. And as you say, Callie, having an actual sword sticking out at that angle, no. Could he have fallen asleep and fallen back on it? Possibly. But what feels a lot more likely is that somebody who he trusted, wife, his member of the King's Guard, perhaps, just impaled him on it. That's the most likely, or maybe just killed him and then made it look like it was the Iron Throne. So I think that is what seems likely. Everybody had turned against him at this point. He tried to rally the banners and just nobody was replying. He was basically all on his own. And so perhaps we have a sort of a Jaime Kingslayer moment, but a couple of hundred years earlier, and we just don't know who it was who did it. Charis Ballerina asking whether I'd want House of the Dragon to answer the questions about his death or keep it ambiguous. I quite like these things ambiguous. So mean, this is one of the things that I find with House of the Dragon. I loved House of the Dragon. I thought it was fantastic. But sometimes I do just go, wow, as a book reader, I just kind of like not knowing that. I kind of like there being a little bit of a mystery because it allows my brain to go off in different directions. And then you close it down into one thing and it's like, oh, okay, fair enough. I quite like the slight uncertainty about who killed Rhea Royce, which they sort of a bit kept, but we know who was there. I like the mystery around what caused the fire at Harrenhal. They got rid of that on the show. I quite like the idea of still having a few of these mysteries. So I would very happily have it left slightly ambiguous if they ever did make this a TV show. Let's have a quick flick through. Andrew K saying, I do wonder if Maegor did not crush the Faith Militant and certain rebellions, if the other Targs would have been able to do it, being quite young with young dragons. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a fair point. So Maegor did crush a couple of armies and force the High Lickspittle, not the High Lickspittle, the one before that, the High Septon who was railing against the Targaryens, forced his death, and he killed the Faith Militant who were there holed up in King's Landing. He did a lot of the heavy lifting before we get to Jaehaerys. So what Jaehaerys had left to do was to get rid of the Faith Militant who were holed up outside Old Town, and enforce the Faith Militant is not allowed anymore. They're not allowed to take up arms. They're not allowed to be an army. So the job left for Jaehaerys was a lot easier because of what Maegor had done. But if Jaehaerys had fluffed his lines on that, then it would have just got big again. So I think it's definitely fair to say that if Maegor hadn't done that, then it would have been a lot harder. Would it have been impossible? I mean, I don't think so. I think we would have seen whether Jaehaerys had it in him to do that. And because he didn't have that many opportunities to actually show whether he could be as hard and cruel. They were there trying to figure out if this is where going ahead in time here. Septon Moon, if you've read Fire and Blood, Septon Moon was the leader of the Faith Militant outside Old Town, and they were trying to figure out what to do. Jaehaerys and co, he had his council there. They were trying to figure out what to do about this, and they were in a bit of deadlock. They could have just gone over with a dragon and sort of burned them all, but they sort of hadn't decided to do that. Maegor would have done that. Maegor would have gone straight away and done that. So there's a very big difference, and it's only because of the murder of Septon Moon by who knows that meant that he didn't have to make that decision. Let's flick through. Amy Smith saying grey characters are a great feature of the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. I think it's a big reason why us fans can discuss forever. Absolutely, lots of different things to be talking about. Astronaut E saying, I think Maegor dropped his donation to the orphans and puppies of Westeros under the throne and died while trying to retrieve it. That's definitely what happened. And Sword of the Morning talking about the Middle-earth dragons were never controlled. The Targaryens would rule. Possibly, yeah. There's a lot of debate about which King Henry was the best going on at the moment, which is a very erudite and clever discussion to be going on with. Anyway, let's go back to questions from my patrons. 444 saying, hi Robert, do we know or suspect who was the inspiration for Maegor? literary inspiration this is. George R. R. Martin is often inspired by British Isles history, but the only examples of cruel and ruthless rulers that came to my mind are some Roman emperors, or examples from an eastern direction, like Tsar Ivan the Terrible, or, nomadic tribe leaders like Attila, Timur, and Genghis Khan. Lady Pushkin's added helpfully, Edward II was allegedly murdered with a red-hot poker up his bottom. True. Who was the inspiration, the real-world inspiration for Maegor? Well, I think just sort of a couple of caveats first. George R. R. Martin, first of all, he doesn't always have real-world inspirations. Yes, he leans a lot on real-world history, but he doesn't always do. And then secondly, I think we should clarify, I know this isn't not what you're saying, but just to be clear, that he doesn't cut and paste characters from history and say, this is this person. He takes bits of inspiration from different places and sometimes squashes them together in one character or one situation. So that said, where is the inspiration for Maegor coming from? And I'd love, I know there are some excellent historians normally here in the chat. I'd love any thoughts from you. I'll read out a few when we get to them. Henry VIII, King of England. There are definite echoes there. We touched on it already. I think the 6 wives definitely does, isn't it? He had 6 wives. Maegor had 6 wives. So that does certainly seem to echo a little bit. And they were both big, strong men. The one thing I would definitely pick up that probably does have some real world historical inspiration is that story of the murdering of the people who built the Red Keep. Now, there are a couple here. Ivan the Terrible is said to have, I think, blinded all the people who built St. Basil's Cathedral so that no one else could build anything like that again. And in India, in the Taj Mahal, which, just as a completely random comment, is beautiful. I've been there many years ago. One of the few places in the world where you think you know what it looks like, but when you go there, it absolutely blows your mind. Anyway, he allegedly cut the hands off of all of the people who built that so that they could not build anything which matched it. Now, those are a couple of sort of historical examples. Let's have a quick flick through where people in the chat are saying, Kieran Grant's saying, Basil the Bulgar Slayer could be an example. Any one of about 5 Roman emperors, lots of Asian or Eastern European meanies. Sword of the Morning, good night to you. Andrew Kay saying Henry VIII, big influence. Maegor is an amalgamation of lots of different influences. Having a flick, there must be some more. James Hatfield saying divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Yeah, that's the rule. With Henry VIII. Sam B saying Maegor has a Vlad III, the Impaler vibe too. Yes, he does. And I think that's it in terms of. Here we go. Left field suggestion. This is from Ost. Left field suggestion for inspiration. Moctezuma II. George R. R. Martin lives in New Mexico, after all. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know huge amounts about that kind of history, but that's excellent. And Lucian saying, just to round this one off, saying there are a couple of kings from the Plantagenet dynasty that remind me of Maegor. Okay, let's go to question from Maura Lee. What was the straw that broke the camel's back that eventually caused the final downfall of Maegor? Who were the lords that first forsook the king? So this is, I'll just sort of build on what I said at the beginning, because we've got just 6 years. But for a lot of it, nobody stood against him. he had opposition all the way through it, but nobody really kind of stood against him. What we see, though, is the turning point in his rule, I think, was the death of Visenya. When Visenya died, that meant that Queen Elissa, Charis, and Alison could escape from Dragonstone. Visenya was this kind of legend. By this point, she was a legendary figure, the last of the three original conquerors, and just a force of nature. And when she died, there was, people rushing around all over the place. And the three Targaryens who had been basically held captive there got the opportunity and escaped from Dragonstone and disappeared. And that's the moment it started to fall apart from Maegor. Because from that moment onwards, out there was a clear challenger to him. Charis was the clear challenger to him. He still had Viserys, the other son, there, but he basically killed him. But that meant that Charis, he had a Valyrian steel sword. He had a legitimate claim to the throne, and it might not be the best claim, but it was a legitimate claim to the throne. And then he went to Storm's End, and the Baratheons supported him. And the moment you got there and you have a legitimate character who everybody can then start to rally around, it's not just not Maegor, it's that, okay, not Maegor, we'll get behind Charis. And you've got the Baratheons, who, let's not forget, I say this again and again, they were one of the big three families. We had the Targaryens, but in the early years of the Targaryen rule, there were the House Velaryon, House Hightower, and House Baratheon were the three big houses. So when the Baratheons, who themselves, let's not forget, were just a couple of generations earlier, they were descended from the Targaryens themselves. Oris Baratheon, the first Baratheon, he was very probably Aegon the Conqueror's half-brother. If he was then getting behind Charis, that made a huge difference. So that was the moment. And from then, all of the dominoes started to fall after that. And it was... yes, it was still a little bit later, but from the moment you had a legitimate opposition to him, which was not just a rabble of poor fellows with swords. Andrew K saying, yeah, losing Vhagar on his side is a massive loss as well, with Visenya's death. Balerion and Vhagar together are even more daunting to challenge. Absolutely, it would have felt impossible to take on the two biggest and most impressive and ridiculous dragons ever at the same time. You get rid of one of them and you've just got Balerion. Suddenly it feels maybe doable. The dragons that they had were not anywhere near the same size, but they had a few of them by then, and that actually then they probably would have thought, you know what, we can give this a go. And the moment that you think you can give this a go rather than just this is impossible, then that's the moment that people start to come on your side. Let's go to a question from Mars of House Bars saying, hi Robert, were the pyromancers around during Maegor's reign? If so, did he ever use wildfire instead of Balerion? Now this is a really interesting one because they're not mentioned as much as you might think or expect in Fire and Blood. In fact, the only time I would have to go back and sort of check again, but the only time I can remember them being mentioned, the Alchemists Guild, is when we get to the 16th name day of Aegon III, the end of the Regency. And there's a throwaway remark that said something like, the Alchemists Guild promised that they would put on a pyrotechnic display, the likes of which no one had ever seen before. And so it's clear that by that point, they are there in King's Landing, and they are relatively established if they're promising things for the new king or for the king. They are described as the Ancient Order. They're also described when we get to A Song of Ice and Fire as having lost a lot of the influence that they had centuries earlier because the Maesters gained in power. The implication is that at the time of Maegor, they were around, but King's Landing, let's not forget, was still, it wasn't a proper city. It didn't have its city walls set up yet. It didn't have paved roads. It didn't have sanitation. It didn't have anything along those lines. There was a keep being the castle being built on the top of a hill, and then just a whole load of other hovels and houses just built up around that area. So the alchemists may or may not have moved in to King's Landing at that point, but they weren't significant enough to play a main role in what was going on. So were they there somewhere? Were they involved? No. Let's just have a quick check on where we got to with the donations. Again, apologies. I don't know why the little ticker thing doesn't seem to be working. We've made it over $1,000. Thank you so much, everyone. We're at 1,079. Let's see whether we can keep this one going. If you have been donating, apologies, I haven't been able to shout out everybody who's been donating, but I've been seeing a lot of very generous donation. Oh, Disputed Lands is here. Thank you so much. I said I'm not shouting anymore. I just spotted you there. Hi there, Amanda, friend of the channel, and has recently been picking up and doing a few videos. We weren't doing any for a while. Do go and check out Disputed Lands. But thank you very much for the donation. Let's go have a quick flick through the chat, see if I've missed anything. Sam B saying the Maesters understating the role of the guild seems very apt. Yes, so that's the other element to this that we have to remember, is that the history we have is in Fire and Blood, which is written by the Maesters. The Maesters replaced the Alchemists Guild as being the sort of the preeminent source of knowledge and lore in Westeros. So it is in their best interests to play down the role of the alchemists. But you could, if you're going down that route, you could also argue, I suppose, that if you're trying to portray Maegor as being a bad and evil king, which we think the Maesters may have been doing, then associating him with the Alchemist Guild probably would have been in the best interests of the Maesters. So the fact that they're not mentioned does seem to imply probably they weren't all that involved. Kieran Grant saying they'd have had to risk all of their dragons just to beat one of them. Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about the balance of dragons. If you have Balerion and Vhagar against the other dragons, then that's not really going to work. Let's go. Lex Roberts saying first time catching the live stream. Thank you for all the content, Robert. Well, you're welcome, and welcome to the live stream. It's a different experience watching it live. Please do get involved in the chat. Let's go to another question from. I've got about 3 more to go, and then I'll dig into the chat properly. Maura Lee saying, what eventually came of the 2 Valyrian steel swords, Blackfire and Dark Sister, who eventually inherited them after Maegor's downfall? Yes, so Maegor had both of them. They started out, the first one, Blackfire was with Aegon the Conqueror, Dark Sister was with Visenya. Visenya gave Dark Sister to Maegor when he was still young, at a young age. And he used that while he was growing up. When Aegon died, that's the point at which Maegor took Blackfire. Aenys kind of gave it to him, but this was very much Maegor taking it. So from that point onwards, he had 2 swords, but he never used Dark Sister again. He was just using Blackfire. He kept Dark Sister was just like a nice wall decoration for him somewhere back in his room. And after that, what happened? So he had the 2 of them. Dark Sister was kept in Dragonstone, we're told. It was kept in Visenya's room when Maegor was king. And the people we talk about, Alyssa, Jaehaerys, Alicent, when they left, when they escaped, they stole Dark Sister from Visenya's room. She just died, and they went in and stole that, and they went off to Storm's End. Blackfire was also stolen and taken down there as well. So when Jaehaerys arrives, Jaehaerys king, he has in his possession both of them. In the same way that Maegor had both of them, he had both of them. Jaehaerys kept hold of Blackfire for himself. That was then passed down to Targaryen king after Targaryen king. Dark Sister, we next hear in Balon, who was the father of Viserys and Daemon. So he was a great fighter, and Jaehaerys presented that. So Balon being Jaehaerys' son, he presented it to him. So he then had it, and then from there it went on down to Daemon. So that's where the 2 swords were. It's a fascinating study of where both swords go, because Blackfire is held as the sword of kings and is sort of held up as being the king should have this sword, and it adds some legitimacy if you have Blackfire. But by the time we get to the Blackfire rebellions, the king giving a sword to his bastard son, some saw that as a sign of that the king was naming this person his heir. That's how closely aligned to the king it was. Dark Sister is different, and for me, even more fascinating, because that had the potential over hundreds of years to sort of go anywhere, really, but it was within the gift of the king, and it went to seemingly the best fighter who was ultra loyal. That seems to be the way that most of the people who were given it where they got it from. So Balon, definitely, we know about Daemon. Daemon Targaryen was ultra loyal to his brother, as we've seen, and he has Dark Sister, and it works its way all the way down to Bloodraven, who is the last person that we know had it. Quickly flicking through the chat. Justin Pettis saying, first live streamer here, welcome. I'm interested in Arya Targaryen, who at one point was Maegor's apparent heir and took Balerion. What's the theory on why Balerion disappeared for a year after Maegor's death? Balerion is an old dragon who is very independent, and that is basically, I think that nobody can really, from this point onwards, I don't think anybody really controlled Balerion. I have a headcanon theory about Viserys. Now, Viserys, this is King Viserys, who we know from House of the Dragon, he was the last rider of Balerion. We know that he rode him a few times, having claimed him, and then Balerion died. And we know 2 facts after this. First of all, Viserys never tried to claim another dragon. He didn't seem to have an interest in it. Secondly, what we have from House of the Dragon is he comes out with a phrase you would never expect to hear from a dragon-riding Targaryen, which is, we should never have tried tried to control these dragons, that they cannot be controlled. And it's like, it almost as if he's thinking, this is a power too much for us. That was obviously foreshadowing what happened in episode 10 of House of the Dragon. But you have to wonder where he got this idea from. My headcanon is that he rode Balerion the Black Dread, and in the same way that we saw much later with Aemond on Maegor losing control, I think Viserys lost control of Balerion. And that's why he never took another dragon. And that's why he started having doubts about whether Targaryens should be riding dragons after all. But really interesting question. Thank you. Dagon Tranos saying, if Targaryens are the blood of the dragon, wouldn't a magical interference in their birth boost the draconic aspects of their nature, thus dominating their actions? Well, yeah, this is interesting. So we had Disputed Lands in the chat a little bit earlier, who's done some amazing videos about the blood of the dragon. So I would highly recommend you go and check those out. In terms of whether a magical interference in the birth of a Targaryen boosts the draconic aspects of their nature, I think George R. R. Martin's answer would probably be, and he wouldn't phrase it like this, but this is definitely the feel, is that he does not have a hard magic system. He thinks magic should be mysterious. He wants magic to be something that we feel that we don't quite always understand, have a handle on, and that's what makes it so magical. And so I think that the idea that you if magic was used to bring Maegor into being, then yes, maybe this had an impact on who he was as a person. Did it make him more draconic? I think there's a good argument that he was more draconic, maybe not in his appearance, but in the way that he acted, which was, I will just kill who I want to kill. I will just eat what I want to eat. I will take what I want to take. And it is very draconic in the way that he acted. So, yeah, I think it's a really good observation. Andrew Case saying, interesting to see Robert's take on this, but definitely could be a number of factors. If magic around his own birth could have affected things, plus potential poisoning or tampering at work. Yeah, so this is questioning Akash Ballerina, his apparent infertility. Why was that? Well, the boring answer, he may just have been infertile. It's possible. That there might not be a mystery here. That's the boring answer. We've said it. We'll put it to one side. The more interesting answers are the two that you've identified. That either something about his birth meant that he couldn't have children. That, if that's the case, that certainly seems to be something Visenya doesn't ever have mentioned to him. So if she was the person doing the magic, as would appear to be the case, then surely she would have had some kind of understanding. I'm doing a video at the moment on blood magic, another collaboration with History of Westeros, which has been really fascinating, looking through how blood magic works in George R. R. Martin's world. And that one line which keeps on coming back when I think about this is, only death can pay for life. That's what Miri Mazdur was talking about with saving Khal Drogo. Only death can save a life. So is it possible? Is it possible that the sacrifice, because all magic in George R. R. Martin's world seems to, with the obvious exception, does seem to involve some degree of sacrifice. Could it be that the sacrifice to bring Maegor into life in the first place is the fact that there is death for anybody? Yeah, he can't have descendants, and any children who are born of him will not survive. Is that possible? Yes, it's definitely possible. The second option is this one that comes up with this Tiana saying that she was poisoning all the children, so that's why he didn't get any. Is it possibly a combination factors? Maybe he was genetically predisposed to just generally that he would find it hard to have children. Plus, maybe there was something magical about his birth that made it harder. Plus, Tiana was there being a bit jealous and not wanting any of the others to have Maegor's children. Is it possible all of those things? It is. Will we ever know for sure? No. But it's this is one of the kind of the sort of George R. Martin doesn't build it up as a mystery. He just leaves it hanging like that. It's the idea that somebody has to have children just because they're sexually active. I think George R. Martin is happy to play with that and say, no, that's not necessarily the case. Jesse Sturgeon saying Maegor did nothing wrong. I humbly beg to differ on that one. Let's flick through. Sundowners Club saying we started our channel a few months ago and cover sci-fi, fantasy, and have done Jon Snow and House of the Dragon. Really like your channel. Well, thank you very much. Always happy to give a shout out to a new channel, the Sundowners Club. Do go and check them out. Kelly Summers saying keeping magic mysterious does make it more magical, but it's also really convenient for an author who doesn't like to plan the story or world in detail in advance. Yeah, this is true. It works well for George R. R. Martin. But I mean, he said that in that interview he did with History of Westeros. He is very, very much against this idea that if you can understand magic, if you can say, okay, in order to cast this spell you need an eye of a newt, whatever, and these are the ingredients and these are the bits of a ritual you need to do, and that is what creates it, that turns it into science. That stops it having the mystery, and it also stops it having the kind of the fear that you do not actually know what this is doing. You do not know if magic is even happening. That's the thing that he was concerned, because at heart there's part of him is a horror writer. It occasionally comes out, but he's got a big understanding and a respect for the need for fear in his writing, and magic should be something ordinary people are scared of. Let's go to a question from Lady Pushkins saying, on the back of the subject of actors in A Song of Ice and Fire, can you imagine Brian Blessed being in it? Absolutely. Brian Blessed, he's getting on a little bit these days, but if you don't know Brian Blessed, then you're really missing out. Big guy, massive beard, even more massive voice. If you know Brian Blessed in the chat, feel free to put a few suggestions in there who he could play in the world of Ice and Fire. Last question from my patrons. Now is a good time to put any more questions in the chat. Also, this is the last time I'm going to give the plug for the charity. This is a charity live stream. This is in aid of Turkey and Syria. The damage that has been done there, ruining tens, hundreds of thousands of lives, is absolutely horrific. If we can at all help, if you can afford it, then there is a link somewhere on your screen to be donating. 100% of the money you give will go straight there, just to literally making sure people have access to water, sanitation, a roof over their heads. This is a horrific situation, and I think we can do something to help out. So please do, if you can afford it, please do donate. Last question from my patrons. Morally, Maegor took Balerion as his mount when his father died. Who rode the dragon after King Maegor, since King Jaehaerys and Queen Alicent each had their own dragons? Yes, so this is pardon me. There are two riders. Only two riders more. I talked about this actually just a moment ago, but we get area. First of all, Balerion just sort of disappears from the page for a bit, but then he's kind of like there and a bit sleepy. Arya Targaryen, who's this great character, who had been the heir to Maegor. Charis makes her his heir as well when he first becomes king. And she does not have a dragon, and she claims Balerion. And we read about this in Fire and Blood, and many people are ahead of me on this one, but she flies Balerion around in a circle, and then he heads east. She appears to have no control over where he's going. He probably goes to Valyria. They come back, and there's horrific stuff. Balerion, this huge, magnificent, ferocious beast, has got this huge gouge in his side. Something has attacked him. Something stronger than him has attacked him. She emerges with just horrible fiery things under her skin. It's horrific. It's the horror that I mentioned a moment ago from George R. R. Martin. She is the first to ride Balerion after Maegor. Then we get Viserys, and that's it. So we only have these 4 riders that we read of. We have Balerion, then Maegor, then Arya briefly, then Viserys briefly. Have a quick look in the chat. We've got some suggestions loose about Brian Blessed. Brian Blessed is a Manderley, suggests Lucian. And who else have we got? Andrew Kay saying if he was 40 years younger, he could have played Bobby B. Robert Baratheon. Absolutely. Somebody suggested being Tulkas, which is obviously over in Lord of the Rings world, but yes, he would be excellent at that. And I'm just having a quick flick through the chat for any other comments. Jenks Anro, he would have been a cool, great John Umber. Yeah, he would definitely. I mean, I think the actor who did it did a fantastic job as well. But yeah, he would have been an excellent, great John Umber. Callie Summers saying, were the killings of Rickard and Brandon by King Aerys II maybe blood magic that boosted Dany? She was supposedly conceived that night, right? Yes, she was. But the... well, she wasn't conceived that night. Actually, no, that she was conceived a little bit later. But might they be blood magic? The 2 things that are that kind of play around here when we've got magic is that first, I've talked about it already, is sacrifice. Every instance of magic, pretty much universally in George R. Martin's world, indeed in most fantasy worlds, is that there has to be some sacrifice in order for magic to work. You can't just conjure something up. Even if the sacrifice is it makes you tired, then fantasy worlds tend to have some of it. You can't just create power out of nothing. Sacrifice, this is where the blood magic thing comes in, is you make a sacrifice, you kill people in order to get great power to do a thing. The Children of the Forest killed thousands, allegedly, in casting the Hammer of the Waters. Blood and some blood, King's blood apparently is even more powerful. So that's the first thing. The second thing is intentionality. There has to be an intention to perform magic. It doesn't just happen magically. You can kill people and not be intending to do magic, and magic just doesn't appear. You have to be doing it for a reason. So as far as we can tell, Aerys II was not attempting to cast a spell by doing that. He was making sacrifices, but actually this was just blood, not blood magic. So I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, there is one glaring moment of magic in the world of Ice and Fire that if I could get George R. R. Martin's answer on, I would love to. That doesn't seem to follow either of these, which is the Beric Dondarrion's first resurrection, because that doesn't seem to have a degree of intentionality about it at all. And there also doesn't seem to be, yes, there were lots of deaths, but there was no intentional death sacrifice in order to bring him back. So that seems to break a lot of rules, and I would love to get George R. R. Martin's explanation on that. But almost everything else does fit into that intentionality and sacrifice in some way. Let's quickly flick through. Morning Throne is saying Danny was conceived the night Eris burned his third hand after Tywin. Carlton Chelstead, yes. Jenks Anro, why would Viserys ride Balerion after knowing what happened to the previous rider? I don't know. We missed this bit of history. Unfortunately, he wanted to claim a dragon. Balerion was the Dragon of Kings. That kind of makes sense. If he was not actually not wanting really to be riding a dragon much, it would kind of make sense. I'll just ride this once and get it done with and then go. So I don't know. Who knows? Andrew Kay saying, given that she raised him and was by his side committing atrocities, doesn't who Maegor become speak volumes of Visenya's true character? Yes, it absolutely does. She was always the strongest and harshest of the three Targaryens, it has to be said. Okay, and I think with that, I will do a final check on how much we've raised just now, which is over $1,100. Thank you so much, everyone, for that. That's incredibly generous. If you are watching this back a little bit later, you can still donate. Most people actually don't watch these live, so don't feel that you can't. There is a link down somewhere. The money, 100% of that money will be going straight to the front line. We'll be providing people with water, sanitation, a roof over their heads. Absolutely vital, going to the people who need it the most. So thank you so much if you have donated. Next week, I think, what should we do next week? We move on from Maegor. We probably should look at Jaehaerys next. I think maybe Alison, but we'll get on to Jaehaerys, and then a couple of weeks after that we'll do another Lord of the Rings one. But I'm really enjoying going through Targaryen ruler by Targaryen ruler. And next week I will formally announce my top secret side project for 2023. In the meantime, it is live. I've just not put any content up there yet, so feel free to go and have a hunt for it. Okay, if you are watching this back a little bit later, there is a link appearing somewhere here to more live streams. A link appearing somewhere here will be to Patreon, which is the best way to be supporting this channel if you wish to do so. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, moderators. Thank you, everyone who's donated. I hugely appreciate it. Take care, everyone. I will see you again next week.